Now, let's go ahead and try and factor this one using the AC method. This one has a few more variables in it. So notice how I have an x squared and I also have a y squared. Don't worry too much about those x's and y's. Really, what you'll see, we'll just focus mainly on those numbers and really hunt down what those need to be. All right. So is there anything that I can take out at the very beginning? Do they have anything in common? Well, no, it looks like the 11 is going to make it to where they don't have anything in common. So I will multiply the a and c terms together. So 6 multiplied by a negative 10. That will give us a negative 60. So we need two numbers that will multiply to be negative 60, but add to be 11. Let's draw our box to help us out. So negative 60, positive 11. They need to multiply to give us that negative 60 and add to be the 11. All right, starting off with writing down all possibilities to give us that 60. So 1 and 60 would do it, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, and 4 and 15. Okay, so the two numbers that we use must multiply to be a negative 60, which means we want one of these numbers to be positive and the other one to be negative. Since we're adding to be 11, the larger number must be positive. Well, I think I see a good option on this list, the 4 and the 15. The 15 is the larger one, so it must be positive, and the 4, the smaller one, so we'll make it negative. Now we'll write down our polynomial and split up that middle term into two new terms. So we'll use 15 xy and minus 4 xy. Notice how we're using that xy here because those are what is on the middle term. All right, now on to that factor by grouping process. We'll look at our first two terms, and we'll look at our second two terms. Okay, starting with the first two, what do they have in common? Well, they both have a 3x that I can go ahead and draw out. That would leave me a 2x plus 5y. Okay, looking at the next two terms, they have a minus 2y in common. What would that leave? So a positive 2x plus 5y. And really double check to make sure your signs work out. Negative 2 times a positive 2 would be a negative 4. Negative 2 times a positive 5 would be a negative 10. So things are looking good. Okay, now that I have that common piece, we'll take it out from both of them. So 2x plus 5y. And then 3x minus 2y. So it looks like this one's factored. And again, you can double check by running through the FOIL process. Hopefully you're getting a little bit more familiar with that AC method and seeing the steps as you go along. Again, that key component is finding those two new numbers so you can split up that middle term. All right, let's do one last example. I definitely wanted to do one where they had a greatest common factor that you could pull out. So notice how initially these numbers are quite large. You got 28, 58, and a negative 30. Furthermore, they all have an x squared in common. So before we even start some of the AC method, let's go ahead and pull out that common term first. Let's see, what do they have in common? Well, everything is divisible by 2, and they all have an x squared. So let's take out a 2x squared. Let's see if this makes things a little bit smaller. So this would be 14x squared minus 58 divided by 2, 29x. And this one divided by 2 minus 15. Okay, now it looks like they don't have anything else in common, but we need to continue factoring it. So from here, I'm going to take its a and c term, and I'm going to multiply those together. Now, these ones are quite large, but we can do it. 14 times a negative 15, that'd give me a negative 210, quite large. So I need two numbers that multiply to give me a negative 210, but they add to be a negative 29. Let's draw our box and really start hunting down some possibilities. Okay, so I have negative 210. Must add to be a negative 29. All right, we want to make this easy on ourselves, or at least as easy as possible. So I'm writing down possibilities that will multiply to be 210. So 1, 210, 2, 105, 3 and 70, 5 and 42, 6 and 35, 7 and 30, 10 and 21, 14 and 15. Okay, now that I have a list of a bunch of different numbers, they need to multiply to give us a negative 210. That means one of these numbers will be negative, and one of them will be positive. They will add to be a negative 29, so I know the larger number must be a negative. It's the only way we'll get a negative 29 when adding. Okay, comb over the list very carefully. The one that will do it will be this pair right here, the 6 and the 35. Sure enough, those multiply to give us the negative 210, and they add to give us the negative 29. Sometimes you might have to go through really checking these one by one, but it's definitely a worthy process. All right, so we have that. I'm going to write down the 14x squared, the minus 15. Let's take our middle term and split it out. So plus 6x minus 35x. All right, now we can continue with our factor by grouping. Grabbing these first two and looking at what they have in common. So I see that we can take out a 2x. That would leave us with a 7x plus 3. Okay, not bad. Looking at the next two numbers. These ones, we can pull out a negative 5. That would leave us with a 7x and a plus 3. Okay, looking pretty good. Now I can grab my two binomials and almost be done. So they have a 7x plus 3 in common. And then there would be a 2x minus 5 left over. Now be careful, this one isn't done. Remember that initial factor we took out at the very beginning? It's still out front of this entire process. So feel free to write it down now in front of all of this. That way you do not forget it. Now we have the final factored form of our polynomial. So using the guess and check method and the AC method can be two great ways to factor your polynomials. I suggest using the reverse FOIL method if the numbers aren't that big or your leading coefficient is 1. If it starts to get a little bit more complicated, then feel free to use this AC method to really break it down. Thank you for watching.